You're going to have the opportunity to ask questions, to interact, and we're particularly pleased to have the moderator with us. You all know Morning Joe. Joe Scarborough is a cable news and talk radio host, lawyer, author, former politician, currently the host of Morning Joe on MSNBC, and from 1995 to 2001 served in the United States House of Representatives from the 1st District of Florida. He was named in the 2011 Time 100 as one of the most influential people in the world. Holy cow. Please help me welcome Joe Scarborough.
Yeah, I remember when Time magazine called and told me I was one of the top, 100 influential people in the world. I told them I wasn't, even in the top 5 in my own household. So, it's a laugh. It's great to be here. First of all, you got to give Hudson a hand. Dude, good job. Way to drag your mom over here. You need to drag more over here. But also, Jennifer. What a great job you're doing, Jennifer. It's so exciting. This is an exciting year. And our message has to be optimistic. But not only does our message have to be optimistic, our leaders have to be optimistic. They have to believe not only in the greatness of our party, but in the greatness of our country. And Jennifer, right now, I talked to her last night, I'm fired up. I'm fired up not only for New Hampshire, but also for Republicans across this country. I was here back in 2010, about this time, and was talking to some state legislators that said they thought they might have a chance to take back the House. And you know what? They did. It was a tough 2 years. 2012 was a rough election, but things changed quickly. It feels now like it did back in 2010. You look what happened in my home state this past week in Florida. Florida 13. You know what? That's a sign of good things to come. We all felt it when Scott Brown won Ted Kennedy's seat in early 2010, that was a harbinger of things to come. I feel it now, and I know you guys do too. It's very exciting to be here, and it's so good to have somebody like Jennifer leading the charge. You know, next week, talking about these big wave election years, I'm going back to Pensacola, my hometown, and we're going to celebrate with my volunteers our victory 20 years ago. Back in 1994, I was 31 years old, ran for Congress. I met another 31-year-old running for Congress. I said, that's a good age, 31. I had no money. I had no name ID. Nobody knew who I was. And I'm always asked how I won. You know, in my district, a Republican had not been elected since 1873. And they hung the last one they sent to Washington. So it was a tough damn district. I remember telling my dad I was running against this 16-year incumbent named Earl Hutto. My dad looked straight back at me and he said, that's great, Joey, but I'm voting for Earl. But I won. I won for a couple of reasons. The first reason I won is because I found out in 1994 you really didn't need your dad's vote to win. You needed a picture of your opponent with Bill Clinton. And I had it. He was going around going, I feel your pain. I made sure my opponent felt the pain of hugging Bill. But there was a second reason. And this is something we as Republicans have to remember. We used to get this right, and we've lost our way over the past several years. You win by knocking on doors. You win by targeting voters. You win by dragging people out of their homes. Just like Hudson dragged his poor mom out of her home. She was going to engage in spring cleaning, but she's here. That is a roadmap to victory. We have to focus. And when you look what happened in New Hampshire last week with the victory, Jennifer told me that you guys, can I say this publicly? Does everybody know how you targeted the people that moved into the state? So Jennifer and a lot of other leaders said, okay, listen, we need to grab every vote because every vote matters. We're not supposed to win this race. So what did you do? You targeted people that had moved to New Hampshire who were Republicans who had not registered in New Hampshire. And you targeted them, and you targeted them, and you got them out to vote. 1,900 votes. It made a difference. And you won. And we have to do that. We have to do that state by state, district by district, community by community, township by township. We also have to have a good message and a strong message and a unified message. We've got to stop shooting at each other. Got to stop shooting at each other. I remember right after Chris Christie won this past year and Ken Cuccinelli lost, and it seems like 10 years ago with all the stuff that's happened in New Jersey since then. But the next morning, everybody said, what party is it? Is it Ken Cuccinelli's party? Or is it Chris Christie's party? No! It's both of their parties. And we don't stop there. We want to expand out. I always challenge conservatives, and yes, I am one, despite the fact the network I work at. And Reverend Al says hello. But I hope my mom's not watching. But we've got to reach out. And when I talk to my conservative friends that helped elect me, I say, you know what? It's not enough that you get people voting for Republicans that come from my household, because we've never voted for a Democrat in a national election anyway. We got to bring people back home. We got to look at people like Colin Powell, who supported Barack Obama 2 times. And every time I say this, and I say this because I get the reaction, it's like, oh my God, Colin Powell. And some people stand up and say, why would we want Colin Powell on our side? He voted for a Democrat twice. Duh. Because a lot of people did that. We want the people that voted for Republicans in the past, that are voting for Republicans now, or Democrats now, to vote for us in the future. I see Pete King over there. You know what? When we know what we believe in and we fight for what we believe in, great things happen. I got elected in '94. Pete and I together and a lot of other people, and Pete thought I was crazy, called me a right-wing nut, said Scarborough looks like he walked out of a tent revival barefooted, you know, like all of that stuff. And Pete will tell you this. Everybody goes, oh, the Tea Party's crazy. They're so crazy. Pete will tell you, we were crazier. He lost some of his hair. He had hair down to his waist before he met me. But we figured out how to work together. You know what happened? We balanced the budget. We Republicans, not Bill Clinton, we Republicans forced it. We balanced the budget for the first time in a generation. We balanced it 4 years in a row for the first time since the 1920s. We passed welfare reform. We cut capital gains taxes. We cut the death tax. We passed regulatory reform. We did good things. We won elections. That's why they kept re-electing us. And then we lost our way. Let's just face it, we lost our way. We took a $155 billion surplus. By the time George W. Bush left office, it was a $1 trillion deficit. We doubled the national debt. We passed Medicare Part D without paying for a dime of it, a $7 trillion liability to future generations. We became reckless, and guess what Americans told us? That they didn't like big government republicanism any more than they liked big government liberalism. So we found our way back to the central message, but it's got to be a message of addition, not a message of subtraction. We all looked in Washington, D.C. this past fall, and we saw Republicans engaging in ideological witch hunts. That's just stupid. We don't have to shoot at each other inside the tent. There are enough big targets outside the tent. And that has to be our focus in 2014. And one final focus, too. Americans did believe in 2012 that we were the party of the 47%. Do you know why Ronald Reagan won 49 states? He won 49 states because Ronald Reagan believed in his heart, and he could tell people with his words that what he believed, conservatism, small government conservatism, liberty, that didn't just help the 47%. That helped all Americans. It was just as relevant to an 18-year-old Latino voter in South Central LA as it is to a 65-year-old hedge fund broker in Greenwich, Connecticut. And if you know a 65-year-old hedge fund broker in Greenwich, Connecticut, you know they take care of themselves well. It actually means more to the 18-year-old Latino voter in South Central LA. The only reason I bring this up is because we have to go into this election, we have to go into this year asking ourselves, what do you believe? And if you believe, like Reagan believed, like Hayek believed, like Margaret Thatcher believed, the shopkeeper's daughter, that freedom and less taxes and less regulation helps that 18-year-old voter as much as the hedge fund broker in Greenwich, Connecticut, then you'll start winning elections again, nationally. Now, we're going to win in 14. But I know Jennifer and the rest of you were tired of the seesawing. We win in 2004. Hey, how great. Permanent majority, Karl Rove tells us. We lose in 2006, and Nancy Pelosi's the speaker. We get it back in 2010. We lose in 2012. I think we're going to get it back in 2014. But we've got to think smarter so we can keep it 2 years later and make sure we don't elect another Clinton to the White House for 8 years. And you know what? I'm a Southern Baptist. I'm a Southern Baptist, and I didn't think I would hear this in New Hampshire. I live in Connecticut now. I didn't hear it in Connecticut, but I said we don't want another Clinton in the White House for 8 years. I heard a praise God. So let's just try this. And all the people said, amen. All right. With that, we got a great panel that's going to talk about how we do that and why New Hampshire is so important, not only to our party, but to American democracy. Let's go ahead and bring the panel up right now. And we'll start. Michael, are you, Michael, come on up. And Andy also. Beamer's coming up. Jim Merrill and Paul Young. Hey, good to see you. I'm doing well. Good to see you. How are you? Good to see you. All right. So Michael, why don't we talk about where did we meet before? It was like it was somewhere in Des Moines.
Yeah,
you guys were about to shock the world.
We were at P.F. Chang's. And
An American-owned company, I am sure.
P.F. Chang's the day before the caucuses.
Day before the caucuses.
And I was trying to spin to you why we were going to win.
Yes. And what did I say?
I don't think you were buying it.
Well, anyway.
You know what? We didn't win that night anyway. We won 20 days later.
You won 20 days later. But you know firsthand. Let's talk about the importance. Rick Santorum, here's a guy, I've known Rick for a very long time, like him a lot. In fact, when I ran in 94, Newt gave me his 1990 congressional campaign and said, follow this. It'll work for you, because he won in the Democratic district. But talk about how important it was in Iowa and in New Hampshire to have a candidate who could actually go and meet people face to face, and why that's important for the process.
Yeah, that's why I love this system so much, because, you know, being somebody that came up through New Hampshire and been involved with the New Hampshire primary, and now having worked in Iowa, it's different everywhere else. I was Rick's national campaign manager, and we went on to win 11 states. And once you leave Iowa, New Hampshire, and South Carolina, the whole landscape changes completely.
Well, talk about my state. I mean, in New Hampshire, in Iowa, you win face-to-face, talking to voters, knocking on doors, the way you can still win a congressional race. But in Florida, you win by raising millions of dollars in back rooms,
Yeah.
writing checks to advertisers, and running 30-second ads.
Yeah.
I mean, that's it.
It's a completely different process. Once you leave here, I mean, in Iowa, for instance, we went to all 99 counties, which is obviously bigger than here. And Rick did 300 and some odd town halls. You know, we knocked on doors, we ran a typical campaign. But once you leave these states, once you leave here, it's all about the money. It's all about how much money you have, how much time you can get on TV, how much, you know, where you are, the stature in the party. Here, the underdog story can happen. And that's why this is so important. You know, we have the ability here to vet our candidates. Everybody in this room meets people in their living rooms, 15, 20 people at a time. Once we left Iowa and South Carolina and New Hampshire, we ended up having rallies with 1,500, 2,000 people. It was in and out. It wasn't so much a hangar situation with Rick, but, you know, it was in and out. You know, you fly in, you shake a few hands, you give a speech, and then you're off to the next place.
And even in those situations, it's not there to meet the people.
No, it's there.
It's there to
talk
get the
people.
headlines and to have the camera say, "Oh, look at the big crowd that met the candidate."
Exactly.
It's completely backwards. I want to go to you, Andy, because you have been involved with Ron, right? And Ron Paul figured out a way really to go out and engage not only on a grassroots level, but create more of a movement where he raised an awful lot of money on the internet. What sort of message does that send other Republican candidates about how you can run? You know, you can run a successful campaign, raise money, even if you aren't connected with all the right, quote, people in Washington, D.C.
Well, Ron said it best. You know, freedom is popular, and he had a really great message of freedom, and it talked to a lot of different kinds of people. As you mentioned in your remarks, you know, we need to be talking to a broad spectrum of folks some of whom may have left home and gone into the woods. We need to bring them back.
And Rand's talking about that too, actively, going out talking about expanding the party, right?
That's right. And, you know, we've had great successes with that. I think in New Hampshire, our experience in 2012, you know, we brought a lot of people around who might not necessarily be the traditional Republican voter, but they believe in freedom and smaller government. And we were able to talk to those people, and, you know, Ron convinced them, I'm your guy, vote for me, and we'll carry that banner. And, you know, we did what we could.
Yeah, and New Hampshire, obviously a very important state
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
for Ron.
Yeah, especially, you know, as Mike said, you know, you get to some other states and it's really just a question of getting on TV and getting the headlines and stuff. But here, you know, I'll steal the joke that everyone's thinking right now here on the panel, which is, you know, I can't tell you the number of people I've met here who said, well, I like candidate so-and-so, but I don't know if I can vote for him because I've only met him 3 times.
Right.
And that's the truth. People really think that, you know. I mean, you go to some other parts of the country, people behind their couch have pictures of their kids at various stages. Here it's pictures of people, presidential candidates, and I'm looking at people shaking their head when I see, yeah, exactly. So you really do get a chance to meet people here and interact with them in a way that you just can't in other states.
Anywhere else, and again, you can in small congressional campaigns, but not once the momentum takes off. I had to sing in my campaign in '94 because I'd always go to these small events where there'd be like 3, 4, or 5 people. And my staff would go, you're wasting your time driving an hour and a half. And I said, my friends, talking biblically again, I said, where 2 or more Republicans are gathered, there too will I be. And it works over and over again. So let's talk about the importance. Talk to us about the importance of not only New Hampshire, but Iowa and New Hampshire in this process. One, sort of a strange caucus state that nobody really understands. But this one, the New Hampshire one, just a straight-out primary where you knock on doors and get people to the polls.
Very unique, and you know, from a state perspective, Iowa and New Hampshire, you know, have a great partnership. We work very closely together, the secretaries of state and the parties, both Republicans and Democrats, to make sure we don't encroach on one another, that Iowa gets its time in the sun and New Hampshire does. So, from a New Hampshire standpoint, it is very unique. And
I mean, you do really give Iowa space. I mean, sometimes you'll let 3 or 4 days pass before you have your primary.
at least, right. Nice if we get the week, so they get their time and we get ours, and let's both kind of stand on their own as two unique processes. And there's a reason why in a contested race, no one's ever won Iowa and New Hampshire at the same time. And it was true this time in 2012 once Senator Santorum was announced the winner and Mitt was in New Hampshire. From a New Hampshire standpoint, we decided in 2012 with Mitt that we were going to make New Hampshire our focus. In 2008, Iowa was 1 and New Hampshire was 1A, and I think that reflected part of our campaign in 2008. In 2012, we announced the exploratory committee at UNH. We announced the actual campaign at the Scammon Farm, and it really helped Mitt kind of get him outside of his comfort zone. He was a better candidate the second time around, and New Hampshire helped bring him out of his shell a little bit, and it made him a stronger candidate going down the road.
Why is that? Because, I think, Fred followed, Mitt. A lot of us followed Mitt throughout the entire campaign. I can tell you that one of the most relaxed times I saw him was his victory speech in New Hampshire here in the primary. The other time was the first debate. That was a pretty good night, too.
Yeah, it was a very good night.
But talk about how New Hampshire in 2012 brought Mitt out. And one follow-up question. People are talking about Mitt running again. Would that ever happen?
Last question first. I'd be a big fan of that, and if he did, I'd be with him today. If you haven't seen the Mitt film on Netflix, you really should. I've been with Mitt for almost 8 years, and so I didn't watch it right away because it was hard to kind of relive it. There's so much emotion that wrapped up in someone like that, and I watched it on a Friday night. It's a very powerful piece, the man that we knew behind the curtain, that unfortunately too many voters weren't able to see for various reasons, campaign decisions, and really a level of humility in Mitt that he wasn't comfortable sharing with the public. But New Hampshire helped bring that out of him. The town hall process that we embraced. In 2008, we called him Ask Mitt Anything.
Right.
And we go in small towns and medium-sized towns and do town halls, and you literally get asked anything.
How many town hall meetings?
Dozens. I don't have an exact number, but dozens.
Yeah.
And he enjoyed them. Mitt's a great example of how you're better the second time around. New Hampshire really made him a better candidate, and so he enjoyed that. And New Hampshire allowed him to do town hall meetings, do smaller meetings. When we left, South Carolina was a disaster for us. Florida, as you pointed out, Joe, is much different, much larger crowds, and he won down there, but we weren't doing town hall meetings anymore. We weren't doing voter engagement the way we were, and so interestingly, when we got to the Maine caucus, and I was in Maine on the ground helping run the Maine caucus, he was flat, and we could see that he was flat because he wasn't doing town halls anymore.
Right.
We had seen in New Hampshire, he enjoyed that. It brought out the best in him, and so we made the decision the night before the caucus to do a big town hall meeting, Ask Mitt Anything the night before, and it made him better as a result.
Well, you think about that, and it's something that the party should think about as you move forward. There's a reason why you go through Iowa and you go through New Hampshire and you become better candidates because you do have to face those questions. But then you go to South Carolina, but then you go into Florida, and it's 30-second ads, and it's a whirlwind after that. It's almost like you go into your shell, and the next time you're really out there is when you're debating.
It's true.
The president. It's a system that is really isolating the second, the balloons hit the ceiling in New Hampshire.
It accelerates dramatically after that, and I was in Florida with Mitt, and I was also in Michigan with Mitt, which was really, and as Mike can attest, really a critical state between our two candidates in that cycle, and it was all happening very quickly.
Thanks for bringing that up, by the way.
Yeah, a good night for us.
How was that for you?
That was, but you're right. There's not the opportunity to interact like you have in New Hampshire, and again, it forces them to be a better candidate. It forces them to develop their positions and defend their positions, which they don't do elsewhere.
So, Paul, answer the question for those who aren't from New Hampshire and those of us who haven't grown up reading, political lore about New Hampshire, and there's a special place in our heart for it. Explain to an 18-year-old voter in Nebraska why New Hampshire should continue to be first and not Nebraska.
Sure. Well, one, we have the tradition. We've been doing it. I mean, my first presidential race was in George Herbert Walker Bush's campaign back when I was at the University of New Hampshire. I was that 19-year-old kid. I had an opportunity. I taught Neil, his son, to ice skate for the first time. I got heavily involved, and I've been involved since that time in every presidential election. I get the opportunity to grill candidates and I'm not unique in New Hampshire. All of you get that same opportunity. We've been doing this generation after generation after generation. We understand what a privilege it is, and we take that honor seriously. We study the candidates. We turn out at events like this to meet them, to shake their hands, to get the medal of the person. And oftentimes, it's very rare that someone runs for president and wins the first time. Because the early primary process is difficult.
What's the toughest part?
The toughest part is you have to be prepared to answer tough questions, not from reporters. The tough
Right.
questions come from the crowd. And a lot of times, people's campaigns are brought down by not being prepared to answer questions on a variety of issues, to come across as sincere and real. A lot of times you'll have very high-profile candidates come here with a lot of money and a lot of ID, and they'll not understand that they're not in a big state anymore. They're in a small town. It's called New Hampshire. They'll be arrogant to someone in Manchester, and before they get to Portsmouth, the people in Portsmouth know about it. And it's too late. I mean, I saw that with Phil Gramm up close and personal. He was the big Texas governor. I know a little bit about that, with a big purse, but he didn't
Lots of money.
understand that retail grassroots politics, because when you're in a big state, it is a lot more of television ad buying. It is a lot more like running for president in a larger state. New Hampshire's different. You've got to go connect with people. You've got to be able to say, I mean, I worked on Jack Kemp's campaign. He would always talk like a congressman. To the good, gentleman from Hampton. That doesn't work. It doesn't work. And so you have to be able to connect with people and come across as sincere, and people really get to know you here.
Who's the best? What Republican over the past, let's say, 25 years, post Reagan, has been the best at doing what New Hampshire requires to win the primary?
McCain.
John McCain in 2000.
Yeah.
John McCain, I worked on President Bush's primary and general election campaign here in 2000, and the summer of 1999, he announced his campaign in June. Big rollout, big list of supporters in New Hampshire. All the big endorsers were with him. There must have been 100 media traveling with him the first day. And I think the polling data at that time had Bush up on McCain by about 40 points. And as Senator McCain would joke, he was in the margin of error, essentially, and he was.
Right.
And 6 months later, on February 1st, 2000, John McCain won by 20 points, a 60-point swing in 6 months. He did it because he did 114 town halls. He started in VFWs around the state with about a dozen Republicans each, and they began to grow and they began to grow. Contrast that with President Bush, who decided to run a national campaign, would come to New Hampshire, would do rallies where he didn't take questions, would do it maybe once every 3 or 4 weeks. He did it the right way, and he earned the vote, and they rewarded him.
I had some people close to George W. Bush that just said he just didn't get the state. He just never really got it. And if you all remember George W. Bush answering questions after he lost by 20 points to John McCain that night, I don't think I've ever seen anybody look quite as stunned. I mean, here was a guy who was supposed to win it all, and he was supposed to be swept in. And you remember, he was absolutely dumbfounded that this perfect political machine had fallen apart in 1,000 pieces. But that gives hope to candidates like Rick and others that want to come up here and actually meet people, shake their hands, answer their questions, and let people get to know whether they want to vote for him or not.
Buchanan did that in '96 here as well. It's the two campaigns that I looked at with Santorum. We had to make a decision that Iowa was going to be the place that we planted our flag. We had an office here. We worked New Hampshire really hard, but we had to spend most of our money in one place. But when you take a look at the playbook, how do you